Well, hello there. My name is Brianna McWilliam, and I am an author, educator, Reiki practitioner, and creative arts therapist with over 13 years in the field. And I also happen to be wild about love and relationships and attachment theory in adulthood. And so for those of you that don't know me, I come into this group fairly often, usually once or twice a week, to do a live feed. And typically it is to answer questions that are raised within my private Facebook group and forum. So today I wanted to address a question which I think comes up quite a bit, and that is, what is the difference between anxious attachment and love addiction? Now, to my mind, there really is no difference. But I tend to refer to anxiously attached individuals as open hearts. I would argue, however, that love avoidance, okay, which is sometimes referred to as an avoidant attachment style, what I refer to as a rolling stone attachment style, is also a form of love addiction. It's simply the other end of that same stick. So whether it's hot or cold, we're still talking about temperature. Whether it is up or down, we're still talking about direction, right? Whether it's in or out, we're still talking about a state of containment, right? If it is separate or together, we're still discussing optimal proximity. If it is wanting or rejecting love, we are still talking about love, right? It's two ends of that same stick. And so in today's video, what I'd like to do is talk a bit more specifically about the experience of the love addict, what I'm going to refer to as the open heart or the anxiously attached individual. And a couple of things I'm going to talk about are their strengths, some of the pain points, habits in relationships, coping mechanisms, as well as what they may want to focus on with respect to bringing themselves to a state of earned secure attachment, feeling more secure within themselves, right? And so by the end of this video, I'm hoping that you will let me know in the comments below, are you an open heart? How did any of this land with you? And what questions were raised for you? Okay. So as I said before, I tend to equate anxious attachment with love addiction. And I refer to these individuals as those having an open heart attachment style. And so really this is a condition in which you tend to feel a constant state of preoccupation with a romantic partner and the relationship. There's kind of an underlying fear of abandonment and rejection, as well as fears of not being good enough. And so there's an essential kind of disconnect from and a distrust of what I'm going to refer to as your essential self, your soul, your true self, your higher knowing, your spirit, your quantum energy, maybe your unconscious self, your inner child, whatever language and or vernacular you would like to use. But I do feel there's a spiritual dimension to this. Okay. Now on the positive side, open hearts are very affectionate and they give a lot to a partner. They're empathic and deeply enjoy offering care and solace and loving support to their partners. You are never going to feel like you're anything less than a top priority if your partner is an open heart, because rest assured, you are always on their mind. Okay. Now, if you are an open heart, it's likely that others tend to see you as being loyal and compassionate, and they come to you for advice, for counsel, or for insight, whether or not you think you really have the ability to help them or not. These partners also bring a lot of fire and passion to the relationship, and they're constantly thinking of new ways to entertain and impress you. They are romantic and they notice even the smallest things about their partners. And so that can mean that there could be a lot of fun and it could lead to creative ways of expressing your love. But it also tends to foster an element of performance in the relationships and a need to entertain a partner and be pleasing all the times and in all ways to keep a partner's attention. And so for the open heart, the challenge is kind of learning when to stop and take off that costume, right? So it's important for the open heart to learn how to allow a partner to make genuine contact with the parts that they may be trying to hide, because only then will they really be able to genuinely feel the love that they're so desperately desiring, right? And so equally, they have to be willing to stop idealizing their partners and holding their lived experience up to some kind of impossible standard of perfection, right? So hiding behind a dazzling performance or clinging to a perfect fantasy of what could be can kind of lead to some damaging tendencies, such as when it comes to expressing your needs in the relationship, right? Because oftentimes open hearts are hyper aware of their neediness, and they work really hard to suppress it because they think that their partners will abandon them if they knew how insecure they really were underneath it all, right? And so sometimes, however, research has shown that when an open heart expresses their need, particularly with a secure partner, and that secure partner is able to get their needs met, that desperate kind of neediness actually quells and they become increasingly independent. Okay. Now, the likelihood of an open heart meeting and being attracted to a stable and secure partner that could meet their needs, however, is unfortunately kind of a tricky business because they're often more attracted to partners that trigger their insecurities. Because often the love addict or the anxious attachment person or the open heart, as I'm referring to it, they tend to come from some form of dysfunction in their early caregiving situations or in their early family systems. And typically that's one in which their emotional needs were not met. Now, that could be due to overt trauma, such as with physical abuse or neglect, or it could relate to developmental traumas, which are sometimes called little t traumas. And that's a series of comparatively small traumas that accumulate over time. Okay. But generally speaking, open hearts have experienced a lack of nurturance for their most authentic self, whether that's through neglect or hyper control of early caregivers. Okay, because remember, hyper-control is actually also a form of neglect because the hyper-controllingness is a dismissal of the authentic self, right? So they're actually both forms of dismiss. Sometimes it's overt neglect and dismissal, or it looks like hyper-control, but it's actually emotional dismissal, okay? So then they try to meet that need by sort of vicariously by becoming a caregiver themselves, or sometimes it's referred to as becoming overly parentified, okay? So open hearts have a tendency to give what they want to receive. They ask what they want to be asked, and they say what they want to hear. And so similarly, they also tend to believe, if I have to ask, it doesn't count. They believe a partner should be able to read their minds and kind of anticipate their needs in the way a mother would a child in early childhood. Right? And so if they have to express a need, then their partner has somehow failed them or isn't their true love. But this is actually a function of giving your power and your authority away in a relationship, because a lot of open hearts are actually very confused about their own feelings and what they really need and want for themselves in a relationship, because they're so preoccupied with the other and what the other's doing and why the other is doing it. And so they rely on their partners to kind of figure that out for them. They kind of exist through osmosis. And so open hearts also try hard to never be a burden to their partners as much as possible. But the problem is that turns into a pressure cooker. And sooner or later, the open heart ends up exploding and somehow punishing their partner or turning that pressure in on themselves and becoming anxiously depressed, withdrawn, and self-criticizing. And so they could then turn to addictive substances for some form of relief. Maybe they overeat, right? Or they eat over their feelings, like literally trying to stuff it back down. Or they become obsessively controlling of their intake as a form of managing their feelings of helplessness or inflicting self-punishment in a socially acceptable form. Okay. Now, an open heart's perceptions and worldview tend to be, the term is usually arrested, but this is like when we get into wounded inner child stuff, right? So that there's a part of you that kind of splits off at a certain age in childhood and sort of stays there developmentally. That's mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And that is usually characterized by what is called egocentric thinking in the field of developmental psychology. So in other words, the world tends to feel as if it revolves around them and what they're doing right or wrong. And the world is viewed as very critical and punitive place with really sparse opportunities for love. So if a partner's having a bad day, their instant assumption is that they've done something wrong and they have to find a way to correct it. It's their job to make that person feel better and to correct it. Okay, because if they don't, then the fear is that they will be abandoned, right? Now, because of this, there's also a fear of being seen for who they truly are, because they're convinced that if they may be found in the eye of the beholder to be lacking, right? That's that not good enough stuff that's at the core of that. Now, open hearts also have a unique ability to kind of sense when the relationship is threatened. So even a slight threat tends to activate the attachment system, and that tends to render the open heart kind of hypervigilant until there are, clear assurances that the relationship is safe, okay? And so when there's trouble in the relationship, the anxious partner's monologue, it kind of sounds something like this. This is probably the best I can do. I know if I love them hard enough, they'll change. Just look at all their potential. They just don't understand unconditional love. I can give them that. I know I can't let this one go. I'll regret it if I don't give us a real chance. And it's so hard to find people that I'm really compatible with. Okay. Now, because the open heart may not have been able to change their early caregivers into loving caretakers, whether that is paying more attention to them or letting up with the hyper control and letting them be more of who and what they are, right? They might respond to a familiar type of emotional availability in their romantic partners. They've referred to this as neurons that fire together, wire together. And so terrified of abandonment, they tend to do anything to keep the relationship from dissolving. They kind of dig in with a partner that may not be so good for them because they convince themselves that the potential is there and love is rare and this is the best I could hope for. And so if the relationship appears to be disintegrating, regardless of those efforts, they may begin to display what are called protest behaviors. And these are behaviors that protest the separation and are intended to reestablish contact. But unfortunately, these are behaviors that tend to push partners away. Now, if you want to learn more about protest behaviors, I have a video on YouTube about that, and I welcome you to check it out. It's the very same title, 4 Protest Behaviors of Anxious Partners. But I just want to kind of wrap up this video with a bit of an examination of the felt experiences and the observable behaviors of individuals that have an anxious attachment style and or what I call an open heart attachment style. Okay. So here are a few characteristics of the love addict struggling with anxious attachment. Okay. So you tend to be accustomed to a lack of love in your romantic relationships, and you fall into people-pleasing mode very often and easily with your partners, kind of willing to wait for an inordinate amount of time for evidence of reciprocation of loving feelings. You take on more than the lion's share of the responsibility, the guilt, and the blame in any relationship, because if you're responsible for something going wrong, then it must be within your control to fix it. And you can make that other person behave better and be more loving to you if you can just figure out the problem and fix it yourself, right? You may have really critically low self-esteem, and you struggle with feelings of unworthiness. So you believe that you have to earn love, and you tend to be drawn to partners that you find challenging or edgy because they make you work for their love and approval. And so conversely, if any partner gives you their love and affection too freely, you find them to be too boring or too good for you or too nice because you haven't had to earn it, right? And then you suffer from kind of a desperate need to control your partners or the relationship because you feel insecure in it. And so this need for control typically becomes masked by being over-helpful. So you're trying to make yourself indispensable to a partner because if you can make them need you, they won't leave you. But this generosity tends to be a double-edged sword because since you have worked so hard to make your partner need you, you always question whether or not they really love you for you. And you probably, on top of that, struggle with knowing who the real you is anyway. Okay? And then you tend to get lost in the potential of the relationship rather than the reality of the relationship. So you would much rather entertain your fantasy of who your partner could be and are most upset when they don't live up to that standard. You may also struggle with other forms of addiction, and that could be drug abuse, alcohol abuse, food addictions, shopping addictions, hoarding, gaming addictions, or even eating disorders, and so on. And so that is more a list of characteristics of the anxiously attached individual, the love addict, the open heart. Now, if you've identified these characteristics, perhaps in a partner or a family member, it might look like this. Perhaps your partner is intrusive and over-controlling. Maybe they monitor every move you make. Maybe they have high demands and they don't give you any space. Maybe they take everything super personally and then they overanalyze everything you say. Maybe they interpret most situations in the negative. They press for too much too fast. They don't respect your boundaries or a need for space. They expect you to read their mind and then they blow up or give you the silent treatment when you don't. They're hot 1 minute and then cold the next, or they're just very fearful of being abandoned and rejected most of the time. Okay. Now, one of the things that the open heart, one of the challenges they face, and one of the things that would help them to really get in touch with themselves and stand more sovereign in themselves, is to focus on what they feel good about within themselves. Like, what is something that, as an open heart, just try to think of it as independent of relationships. What is something that you are really, really good at, that you could do with your hands tied behind your back, that you could do with your eyes closed? Something that you are really, really good at, that brings you a sense of deep sense of satisfaction and accomplishment and love for yourself, right? You feel proud of yourself. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be cooking a great meal. It could be, I love riding the promenade next to the river. It could be art making. It could be dance. It could be, other forms of activation, body activation. But the way we transition from being so hyper preoccupied with the relationships to being able to stand much more sovereignly within ourselves and to be more responsible for our own feelings, as opposed to relying on our conditions to determine how we feel and move throughout our day, right? Is to find the thing that you feel the most positive about and to attend your focus on that, as opposed to getting caught on this hamster wheel of trying to figure out your partner because you think if you figure out your partner, somehow that's going to make you happier, okay? That's kind of a backwards way of doing it. And so I just want to go back to what I had mentioned in the beginning, okay? If, let's say, you're not in a partnership right now, or you're struggling with a breakup, or you're at the precipice of a breakup, right? And you want to try to fix the problem, okay? Here's the thing. Whenever you attend to a problem and you're talking about all the things that you can't have and you don't want and you don't like, you've got a lot of momentum tied up in it. And that is one end of the stick. And so you tell yourself, I'm not going to pay attention to it. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. You're not going to do what? That thing. What thing? The thing that always screws up my relationships. I'm not going to do that thing. Or I'm not going to date that kind of person again. What kind of person? That kind of person. So then you're like scanning everyone. Are they that kind of person? Right? And what happens is you end up just continuously calling in that person in, because it's two ends of the same stick. Right? I'm going to go back to what I said before. Whether it's up or down, it's still directional. Whether it's in or out, you're still talking about containment. Whether it's wanting or rejecting love, whether it's wanting a particular kind of partner or knowing that you definitely don't want that kind of partner, you're still talking about that kind of partner. And that is how the universe responds to you. Okay? So you shift that focus from being outwardly striving, outwardly focused, outwardly analytical, picking apart your partners, trying to figure out how you're going to get them to do something that's going to make you happier, and turning that focus in on the self. And I recommend focusing on things that you're good at, that you love, that give you pleasure, that you could do with your hands tied behind your back. And the more you focus on this thing that you love, the more energy it's going to titrate from this hamster wheel you've got going on that negative cycle. Right? It's just you're going to be able to change the trajectory of that energy. And then you'll start calling in partners that meet you on that energetic and vibrational level. Okay? So I hope you've enjoyed this lecture, and I would love for you to let me know in the comments below if you feel like you're an open heart. Did any of this land with you? Does any of this sound like your situation? And in reflecting on these things, what are some questions that are raised for you? And the more feedback I get, the more videos and content like this I can make. So I hope you enjoyed that video. And of course, if any of it does resonate with you and you would like to learn more, I do have a course called Healing Attachment Wounds. And it's 7 easy, fun lessons over the course of 7 weeks that take you from feeling lost and kind of confused about your relationships to really stepping into your love life as a conscious creator of it, rather than just as a survivor of it. And I put a link to that in the caption of this video. There are some testimonials and other information on the About page. So I invite you to click on over and to check it out. And I will see you next time.